embarrassing. My mom actually was set to retire 2 years after that. And the night that happened and the hour that happened, she had a pretty big heart attack, as it turns out. She didn't know what it was. She actually had what was called a massive heart attack. She had it at night in the sleep, and she just rolled over, basically, and went back to sleep. And, you know, it's one of those stories where she went into the doctor, and they got her better, and now she's great and all that sort of jazz. But the doctors were saying, you know, this should not be this way. You know, you had a massive heart attack, and something should have happened. So I always thought there was a bit of something going on there, too, myself. So that's my end of the story. If you remember more, if my interest doesn't show. All right, the other thing I wanted to say is actually, this is a different story. This is a different thought, but it was something I was thinking about, not sexually related at all. So, actually, I'll make a point on that. I've sat in a lot of seats during the VNC and a lot of other things and heard a lot of strange things, too. Some that I guess is a good precursor for my story. Some that are just outrageous that I don't believe. Some that I just kind of put on the shelf. Some that you just kind of go, this defies known logic. And I actually am trying to train myself to just put things on the shelf rather than just outright say they're wrong, even when they go against things that I know, physics that I know for sure to be true. So I guess I'd encourage you all to do that. I know that we know what we know, but the only way we change is by opening up our sphere of knowledge and actually looking, or at least opening the possibility for other things being out there. So a lot of things I just don't plain know about, but hopefully by having an open mind I can keep learning about it. This is what I wanted to say. There's a real difference in perception between where we are and where something else is, or where, I guess we could use the word truth, or activities truly are. If I use the analogy of our minds are actually in this room, and the truth and the reality and the cause-effect is outside, it's very hard to get an actual physical experience about what's going on out there. It's very hard to explain to somebody else. The only way to get there is to physically walk out the door. And once you're out there, you can feel what the sunshine feels like, and it will feel like nothing anybody could have ever described to you before. What I wanted to tell you is I started thinking about, I put some of these things on the shelf and started thinking about them and thinking about them, and of course not that many make sense. These are pretty hard concepts, and after years of telling people, yes, you have personal responsibility, and yes, everything you do in your life, you caused everything, and having people say, no way, and you can hear the victim kind of role coming out of people, I just started playing around and said, this is back when I first talked to you when I first came here, John, about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That for me basically says, okay, if that's really true, if my reactions are causing all these things to happen, and then a little light bulb went off and said, okay, I can actually cause things to be happening too. And Eric told me a story about you getting in taxis in Maui, getting rides home, or getting rides to the airport, saying, I think I'll just get a ride to the airport now. I want this to happen. So I still don't know if it's okay, but I figured if Doug's doing it, it's okay. So I started doing a few of those things, silly little stupid things, saying to my mind, okay, I'm going to call this person, they're going to tell me this, and this is going to happen. And build up a little energy, do a couple things, and guess what? It happens. Yeah, exactly. I get a letter and I say, this is one or two things, it's going to be this thing. And then I heard actually a good physics lecture, which I liked a lot, and this guy gave this analogy. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is basically if you observe something, you change it. There is no way to observe something without changing the outcome of that thing. And the classic example is either a light in the refrigerator, or since we're all really mechanically oriented and we know when we open the door the light's on and off, physics guys have introduced a new concept. It's the cat in the refrigerator. And the idea is it is cruel. Sorry, but these are physicists out there. The idea is if you put a cat in the refrigerator, he's alive. And if you come back a year, 100 years later, he'll be dead. But there's a certain point in time that he's alive, and there's a certain point in time that he dies. Now, don't get, this is not about killing cats at all. It's about our perception of things. How do you know when you open that refrigerator the light will be on or off? How do you know that cat will be alive or dead? The end thing is, it's locked, it's sealed up. You don't know. You absolutely don't know. There is no way you can know. And by trying to, oh my gosh, if I try to observe, if I can actually affect the outcome by that Heisenberg uncertainty principle applied, then you can do a heck of a lot of things. Then I started thinking, actually I had some pretty good thoughts about what really is the nature of a victim role in life? And I kind of got harsh. I started getting harsh on people and just calling them on the carpet and saying, you're doing this to yourself. You know, please go over there and do it to yourself. I don't want to stand next to you when this sort of stuff happens. And you can actually, I have been harsh on a few people like that, but you can change them a little bit. You can get them at least to think about a few other things that might be possible. And for me, some of these things are very subtle and still hard to believe, but some actually, now in the last year, I'm starting to see the mechanism with which my mind actually creates things. Some are really nice and karmic and energy is so subtle you can't see. Some are really stupidly obvious, like my subconscious will stub my toe if I'm resisting something, and I'm not thinking about it. It's a real mechanical thing that's totally going inside my brain, my body, my toe. There's nothing psychic, spiritual about it more than what I'm doing to myself. And there's other things that are really not. To get somebody to call you up and tell you something one way or the other, to have something happen one way or the other, boy, how can I affect something that happens thousands of miles away? How can I affect something very major that happens thousands of miles away? This might be kind of treading on dangerous ground, and I know John said at one of the last things in the VNC, watch out what you do because you have more power than you think you do. But I think that's true, and actually I think if you keep the right idea in mind, both looking at the things that come into you, but also the way you can affect the world positively, negatively, or just however, by looking at the way you're thinking, it'll help, actually for me, it did help understand a lot more about what the difference between what we know as the victim role and actually what the physics of the world is out there. Help me kind of quantify it all, and hopefully help me obfuscate the situation so that Doug won't remember much about the details of that night on Maui.
Jim, thank you very much. I'd like to bring out one quick concept that I hope you underscore forever in your list of things to remember and to learn. In Chapter 11 of Book 1 of the Logic and Sequence series is the list. Now that, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most important things you can learn. But you have to learn how to apply it properly. Now, Jim is bringing out these concepts that outcomes actually occur as a result of our expectations. I don't think he said it that way, but that's the way it is. We expect it to turn out a certain way, and then it turns out a certain way. Now, here is wherein we have to understand, and sometimes it takes many years to understand this, that we have to subjugate our own goals, our own expectations, and all of these things to wherein we still our minds sufficiently to realize that karmically we've already established such a hodgepodge of rattle around us that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't put in order, that we haven't stopped, that we haven't corrected. And we have all of these karmic consequences of prior decisions or prior acts of will that where the entire world around us is upside down and backwards. And then you read a book on how to influence friends and grow rich, and immediately you're out there putting forth heavy-duty goals, all kinds of programs for yourself to get more karmically implicated. All right? Now, this is something to think about. So one of the things I want you to think about that has been given to me, which I understand, and that is this. We're here to undo our karmic considerations. We're here to work on our list and to correct, to the best of our ability, every single infraction that we have done where we have caused pain, heartache to other people. And this sometimes takes a lot of time to correct. If our mind is on self-aggrandizement, where we're out here trying to save the world or trying to win a fortune and so on, we're barking up the wrong tree. And frankly, that's where most of us are, because we're all trying to be successful from the world's point of view as to what success is, rather than to complete and set in order those karmic confusions that for many, many eons of time we have set into active operation in our lives, and now we're reaping the consequences of that. Let me give you an illustration. One person here, for example, may have a serious illness. Yet, they're out here trying to solve 20 other people's problems who are coming to them for help. Here's where you have to say no and put your attention on priorities of doing that which is correcting the outflow of energies coming from you, which is causing you to be in a state of where the life expectation isn't going to be very long. I find that there are people here in the room where they have relatives who have died who spend all their time taking care of other people first, and they don't take time to take care of themselves because they're always out here doing for everyone, and everyone's expecting them to because they've always done it before. Let's forget what other people's expectations are. Let's put those up on the shelf somewhere and get to it when you can, and deal with those things that you know are necessary to put corrections in your own life. I want Anita to talk about this because this has been one of her greatest conflicts, and I'm responsible for that.
Can you ask that question again, John? What are you asking me?
Okay. We're talking about the lists, all right, on the things that our heart tells us to do, right? Okay, what happens when you have a house full of people? You have 100 phone calls a day coming in, and you don't have the time of day to even put 1 ounce of effort into the things that you have on your list that you know you have to do for the healing of your own body.
Well, this has been a tremendous conflict with me ever since I've met John, because, you know, my yoga used to be so important, my meditation used to be so important to do every morning when I wake up. And being with John, it's the minute you wake up, it's body electronics. And there's phones ringing, and there's people at the door, and there's one thing after another, and we just work from morning to night sometimes, you know, and it's a nonstop thing. So what I have come to do is to meditate while I am working. And I've made a compromise in it in a way, where I continually call upon the God presence through the day, and I don't take a specific time to sit alone and meditate anymore. Sometimes I have those rare opportunities where we get that, but most of the time we're surrounded by people, so we don't get that opportunity. Sometimes I break out into hysterics. Linda and Corey caught me one day where I just really needed to have that free time. But Corey survived that, I think, I hope. One day I really needed that peace and quiet, and we just had a lot of people coming over and stuff, and but I did survive. But there are times when, yes, when you get involved with service to humanity, where you don't get that free time within yourself, that the little things that you really want to do and to help your own body. And I guess it's a fine line where you have to make that choice to some point, where depends how ill or healthy you are, where you just have to say, stop, I have to take this time in the morning and do this, take my pills, do this, do that, whatever, or, you know, because it may really affect your health. For me, somehow I've gotten better. I had rheumatoid arthritis, and I've gotten better through the years just through not being able to have any free time, but always just taking the moments in between everything. And it's worked for me, but it's been a real struggle at times.
What I've told Anita, and what I want to do is share with you, is many people go out here and they meditate, and they meditate, and they meditate on peace and love, and somebody comes to the door and pounds on it. Get out of here, I'm meditating. I'm learning how to love and have peace in my heart. Get out of here. Quit bothering me. And I think about that, you know, and I see this happen so often with so many people because their agenda is disrupted terribly. Now, meditation, if you go up on a hill with a field of flowers, you know, anybody can get the Spirit of God. But when you're down in Calcutta and you're rubbing shoulders with the teeming masses of sick and afflicted and busy people trying to survive and eke out a living, and the masses running to and fro as fast as they can, you know, trying to survive, I take a look at that, and all of a sudden I realize that when we're meditating properly, we'll be able to rub shoulders with the masses of humanity and still keep that same love and that same peace in our heart, no matter what is transpiring. And at that time, we're following the pathway of least resistance, not the pathway of non-resistance, because there's no resistance in us to what's happening. We're not attached to outcomes again. Things don't have to be a certain way. Things don't have to be comfort zones. Things are the way they are, and we look at it simply the way they are, rather than trying to wish it to be something other than what it is. And so this concept of meditation is extremely important. Now, the same thing is true about our list. That if we deal with our list in an appropriate manner, our list becomes oftentimes where we're aggressive toward completing our list, and it has to be done in a certain way, and we have to get 20 items done here, and we find out we get 3 or 4 items done, and then we're a failure, and we're all frustrated. Take one thing at a time, do it thoroughly, do it to your satisfaction, so you can say it is complete. Don't allow yourself to be hurried, frustrated, or shall we say inconvenienced by situations that don't meet your comfort zone. There are several factors in here that we're leading up to things later on that we'll be talking about in depth. But these are things I have been on my mind solidly, and I want you to consider. A lot of that has to do with the material covered in this class. We're trying to cover some things here that we haven't covered in depth before, and to have you think about them so that you can use these things as a teaching tool for the people that you're working with, because you are now instructors. You're no longer just students. You have to take this information, assimilate it, and pass it on. This is where the interest is. Okay, now that's off my mind. Questions?
This goes back a while. I've had this question for a while now. Is sodomy demonic?
Is sodomy demonic? Is that what you said? Let's discuss some things here. Some of these will be safe for body electronics. But every form of unnatural sex is going to be involutionary in nature. Involutionary. Going down into a total identification with matter, away from the evolutionary spiral which takes a person up to the position of God. Now, who knows the definition of sodomy? Yes, sir.
Anal sex between two males. Well, my understanding is that's not sodomy, but
It is my understanding that in the highest regard, the relationship of intercourse should be as it has been intended to bring about the most spiritual relationship of love at the time of intercourse, that a child may be born and conceived in love. Okay. If you have energy patterns where you are entering the wrong orifice with the wrong purpose in mind, then that energy pattern is going to permeate not only the man who's involved in it, but also the woman who's involved in it. And later on, if any type of a conception takes place, that child that is conceived in that type of a mental, physical, emotional environment will take on those patterns of emotionality and become less than, shall we say, godlike in their attributes. Because at the time of conception, when that happens, you are stamped. The egg and the sperm are stamped with the energy patterns of the mother and the father. And if that energy pattern is not where the mother and father are conceiving that child in a love relationship, not a lust relationship, but a love relationship, then you're going to have 2 strikes against that child before it's even born. Now this I want you to consider. Therefore, you should look upon a sexual relationship as a holy, sacred activity which is there for the purpose of having children. And anything less than that is going to stamp that child, if it is conceived, with a lot of heartbreak that that child throughout life will never overcome. And they will be impressed with these energy patterns which will affect their behavior throughout their life. So sodomy is not of God. This is not acceptable in a sane, civilized society, but is a part of a society which is corrupt, evil, and immoral. Strong enough?
Also, on the astral plane, a lot of these kind of energies, if you continually are engaged in it, they build up into sometimes an entity which takes on a form, which then starts to influence you. Yeah, I'm just talking to you. I'm talking to you because you asked the question. I'm not thinking that it's you. Okay. Okay. Yeah, these energy patterns can build up into an entity form, which then can be attached to the person and influence them.
Okay, any questions there? Now, do you want to get in deeper into other subjects? Okay. Donna.
The longer you wait for me to come up here, the more questions I have by the time I get here. Okay, well, we hit sodomy. How about oral sex?
Anything that is not designed for the purposes for which they are intended becomes something which is out of order with divine plan. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's fun and it feels good. Good. That's fun and it feels good, but remember, whenever you're doing something which is out of harmony with the physical body's function doing what it was intended to do, all right, then you're going to have a recognition that problems will result from that. Oral sex is put into the same category as sodomy.
Okay, a couple things I wanted to say. One was in reference to things that you've been talking about earlier, as far as taking time for yourself and that. And my book that I generally follow is more like the Bible. It's not the only one, but it's mine that I'm most familiar with. And when it says, love thy neighbor as yourself, That means as yourself, not more than you, not less than you, but as you. That means you're supposed to be on the list somewhere, not everybody else on the list and not you, kind of thing. Okay?
No partiality.
And my ex-husband, he went to your Health and Human Mind class in Wisconsin, and he's pretty good at doing, as far as being able to do things, of you being able to create your world. One of the talents he has is creating the weather or influencing it. And he's learned, first he was just doing things like keeping the driveway dry while he worked on the car, where it was raining everywhere else. And then he did things like trying to get rain where they needed it or not have it, and finally realized as he learned his responsibilities that he had to look at more than just the area he lived in or that they lived in, and it had a universal proportion and responsibility there. So he doesn't do that anymore. But that brings me to what my main question was to come up here to ask you about. What is our responsibility when they're trying to put nuclear waste in the ground, or, I mean, these types of things? What, if we're creating our whole world, what do we do to stand by and work on our spiritual evolvement, or is there some action that we are to take while we're here that goes beyond just what we do for in our own personal household?
Regarding nuclear energy, would you hold that question? Just hold the question. And we'll talk about that one later. That's a good one. Okay? And I'll get my notes together and I'll be prepared to answer that. Ken, are you here for a question, sir?
Not a question, a comment, if I can make one, please. I'd like to make a comment about Janine and Reiki, and that there is an initiation process. And there's a quote that I ran across a number of years ago as I was going through some initiations myself that has been passed through lineages, so it's been carried on for literally thousands of years. But I'll just quote this to you. It's, initiation brings to the consciousness the emotion of the reality of the experience. And I think if we can think about this for a minute, every time we go through a healing crisis and we go through it and we finish with it, that is an initiation, and we bring this into our reality. Yeah, I think that's about it that I want to say, just to think about that. Sure. Initiation brings to the consciousness the emotion of the reality of the experience. And this reality can be, there was a question asked to me, is it dream time or real time? It's both, because we do exist in both planes, and it can happen anywhere, anytime. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm not very clear on what I'm asking here, but you have said that sex is a means for procreation, and that is why we have sexual relationships. Does that mean if people don't want to procreate, if they've had children or they're not interested, should they still have sexual relationships?
This is a big question that we'll leave for the body electronics portion of the seminar, because we're going to get into that aspect of it and the energy patterns which have to do. And you have to understand this, because once you understand the energy that governs the human body, you will understand that anything that is less than what the body was originated to do, originally created to do originally, anything less than that is going to be part of the involutionary spiral down to where the person becomes totally captivated and controlled by emotion and matter. Now we'll discuss that. So just hang on to that one. Yes.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm not being racist here now, but I wonder at home in Africa, we do not know much about the abnormality of lesbian and homos. What is it with the other race? And when I got to San Francisco, it was the day, they said it was the day for the homos and sexually and lesbians, and I did not, I mean, I saw real men with men, so I don't know if there's some explanation.
Now, this is important, folks. I want you to listen carefully. Everything is ass backwards. No, bass backwards when it comes to homosexuality. Now, here's where I want you to consider this very carefully. Now, there may be some homosexuals here, lesbians. We've had people go through our advanced classes who are very, very militant lesbians and very, very outward homosexuals. When they get rid of their resistances that we'll explain in the body electronics class, the woman becomes a woman and the man becomes a man. They're no longer half a woman or half a man who are involved in homosexual activities. Did I make that clear? Because when the hormones are corrected, which are disturbed from the time of conception in many cases genetically inherited, people are born to be what they are at that time, and many people who are homosexual, they're that way because that's the way that the genes lined up because of tremendous resistances on the part of both the mother and father in unnatural type sexual activity, in unnatural type situations where there was sexual abuse and a mental and emotional abuse in the home. Now, when those resistances are cleared away, nobody will ever be born homosexual. They'll be born as normal people, where men will have normal desires for a woman and a woman will have normal desires for a man, and then we'll have to worry about them because they'll be so healthy. We'll have to work that out to where they understand education-wise from the time they're 3 years old. Okay? Now, a lot of people get down on my case because I'm not anti-homosexual. But the thing is, they are not normal. They have problems that need to be corrected, and when those problems are corrected, things come right. When we talk about this in body electronics, you'll understand, so just put it on the shelf. We have dealt with many, many homosexuals. And we've dealt with lesbians and we've dealt with gays, and eventually they all come right if that is their desire to do so. Now, many times you have totally destroyed a cultural way that they have developed, where they have developed a likelihood, where they like men, where the men like men and the women like women. This is the way it is, folks. Now, what happens all of a sudden when they remove for themselves all the resistances in certain areas that they have suppressed for centuries? All of a sudden, they're no longer gay. And we've had, for example, I've got a letter from this one lady. She had a child by a man that the last thing she wanted when she came to Maui, Hawaii, was anything to do with the man. And she found this man, a very loving man. She got pregnant. She got a letter later on. She said, "My whole life has changed. I love men now. I don't love women anymore. I've lost all my friends, and I'm having to develop a new life where I am. I'm no longer a militant lesbian." Now, I mean, that's one of many letters that I could talk to you about people whose lives have totally changed. So now you might say I'm anti-gay. I'm not anti-gay. I'm saying that they're born that way, and their feelings are that way, and they will remain so until they change their emotional attitudes, which reflect their hormones, and then as a result of going through the same pain, emotional and physical, as others do, they get to the mental body and they change their thinking, and they're no longer lesbian, they're no longer gay. They're normal human beings. I think judgment's not a part of this class at all. But I'll tell you that when you give a lesbian or give a gay homosexual hope that they can change their life a bit, all of a sudden they just almost go into a tizzy because it's changing a whole lifestyle. I hope you have nothing but love and compassion for these people because they're having a real struggle with life as it is. Pardon me? You got a real problem there because you got exactly the same problem. You got a person with both male and female energies, and I'll tell you, it goes right back into the genes. Bisexuality, transvestites.
Things are getting too serious here, John. My question. That's what the skirt's so long, you see, guys. You asked for it, Tom, you know. What's it? Oh, God. Anyway, my question was about you saying that through the genes, through resistances within the two parents, how that brings about when the child, you know, is born and everything as it grows up, these tendencies, whether to lesbian or whether to homosexual. How does that relate to, and can you explain a little bit about how that relates to that, say it's a woman who's growing up and how she would perhaps resist her father and then take on the energies of her father, and then is the fact that she's born that way, does that give her that tendency in the first place to resist her father? And could you go into that?
We won't be going into that until we hit body electronics, because it's going to be a difficult thing enough as it is to explain it. Okay, but let's wait till body electronics. By that time, we'll see how many people are weeded out.
What about birth control, both oral and non-oral forms, relative to this issue, and generally making love with the intention of not bringing a soul in or not wanting to bring a soul into this life?
What energy are you filling your mind with when you're preventing a child from coming through you that you may be karmically tied into? How does that little child feel where it's been waiting around on your shoulder for 6 or 8 years until you're ready to have a child, when that child is karmically your responsibility of bringing into this life? Think about that for a few minutes. Anything that is less than a natural activity will have some degree of mental, emotional, physical disruption to the body, just like with your any type of birth control situations, birth control pills and so on, where we discussed that before, where it causes literally a disruption in the system, the hormone system, and is one of the prime causes of cervical cancer. I mean, let's take a look at some of these things. We're in trouble, my friends. We're doing so many things unnatural, and the doctors promote it, the different, what do you call it, the pharmaceutical firms develop it and foist it on people for money making, and people go for it because they don't have to be responsible for going out here and having fun with their screwing, okay? That's what it boils down to, and that's what they want. They want to have fun with no responsibility. That's down at the bottom of the scale of emotionality. Let's call it where it is. Now, most people are down at level 6 and level 7. We're down there a bit, okay? But the thing is, we don't have to remain there and grovel in the dust like an animal. We can rise to become saints in our lifetime if we choose to do so. I'm getting kind of strong on that, isn't it? That's on tape, and that's where I want it. Okay? That there?
Yeah, I just want to say something about birth control and experience which I had at home. I had hysterectomy, and I have now a grandson. And he said to the mother at one time when I was in Tanzania, they are both in Holland, he said to the mother, actually, you are my sister. I feel you are my sister. Isn't it possible that Mama, he calls me Mama, can be my mother? And they talked about it a while, and one day my grandson turned and said to my daughter, I was with my IM, and I was looking at a big screen, and I was looking for Mama. I didn't see her. That's why I decided to do the next best thing, and that was coming to you. So it is that truly there are these children looking for you people to come through. Just a thought.
Thank you, Esther. Brooke, are you up here for...
Yeah, how does the practice of Tantra fit into your views on sexuality?
Live electronics.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else?
What? No cue jumping.
If the man has the responsibility to produce the oxytocin, help the woman through orgasm to produce the oxytocin, to trigger the mechanism that stimulates the pituitary gland, how does that fit in with birth control and the energies that you're talking about? Well, it seems that the man, in stimulating the woman to produce the oxytocin through vaginal penetration, is practicing birth control, which may prevent a soul coming in. Isn't that going against the energies or going against the purpose for which sexual relations are designed?
What's the question? Because I don't see where that is doing any prevention of or as I don't see that where that's birth control at all. Well, what you're speaking of.
Isn't it having sexual relations for a purpose other than which sexual relations were designed for?
What Ruth is saying, I believe, is if a man and a woman are having a sexual intercourse for the purpose of releasing the oxytocin to release the prolactin, and they don't want to have a kid, they're just trying to do the hormonal thing there, as you've described, is that not out of time and place? In other words, earlier on you were saying it's very, very important for the woman to have a vaginal orgasm, so she has this oxytocin and then the prolactin. But then later you're saying, well, if they're having sex and they're not trying to have children, that's not right. So that's your question, right? Got it.
You have a scale, a gradient scale from 0 to 100. And everything will then fit somewhere on that scale from 100 down to 0. And you have different degrees. What is the intent of the man? What is the intent of the woman? What are the circumstances? Sometimes the woman is so out of control emotionally, she needs to be comforted. And sex is the only way that she knows as to how to know that she's really loved. Sometimes a man is so out of control that the woman had better take care of him in some way, or else he is off down the street to the nearest red light district. I'm talking reality here. And so the woman has to learn to very gently not realize that there's various degrees of this, and there's a time, place, and purpose for all things under heaven, and it's not a black and a white situation. The man has to understand the same thing also. Now, you take a woman who is 23 years of age, shall I use the word red hot and ready, and she wants a kid, and the husband wants to practice celibacy. That marriage will not last very long, and I'll guarantee that. So if that man loves the woman, he's going to have to take a look at the responsibility of giving her a child that she wants, which is her right to want it. And if he doesn't want to be responsible for that, he has to be honest with her so she can go to somebody else to where she can sire, shall we say, have the child that she wants sired by somebody of her choice. And that's her privilege and that's her right. Now, you might take a look at all of the social and psychological ramifications of that, and there can be very, very many of them. But what I'm saying is everything is not black and white, and there's not one law that applies. There's all kinds of shades of gray in between, and that makes it very difficult to even in any way say what would be right for this relationship and what would be right for another relationship. You don't know.
So that's kind of the origin of the expression, different strokes for different folks?
For myself, after that I had quite a lot of sexual abuse, I banned my man out of my life quite far. So I was double. At one hand, I was longing for man, and on the other hand, I could kick and I could kill them, you know. So that was the both energies. You can be safe. I did some solving on this already. So, but I've been divorced 12 years, and I think about 5 years ago, I met a man, and he was gay. So we had a friendship first, but he was very gentle. He had lots of female energy. And it ended up that he never had a woman. So we lived together for 9 months, and it was a sexual relation, but it was a healing for me. And it was a healing for him, because now he's living with a woman. It wasn't, I know also it was an interaction of hormones that for him it helped him to pass through his period of being gay for 20 or 25 years. So, and I didn't have any judgment on that I had a relation started. It was for me a healing, and from that point on, I changed my view. I could believe there were men who were soft and gentle and sexual. And since that point, okay, it just was 9 months because it was a period that I needed. And since I've been working with body electronics a lot around that, and a lot came up for me, and I could integrate and I could start forgiving. I know there is still more for me. I still live on my own, so 12 years now, but I love man. And sometimes I feel, okay, there is still something to forgive there. So, but that was for me like, it was important that I had just that energy at that moment.
Do you hear what this young lady has said? Do you hear this? Here's where you cannot judge. Here's where you cannot criticize or condemn. But what you can do is still take a look that overall, over a period of time, certain things are going to take a person upscale, and certain things are going to put the person downscale. And you have to understand that what will be upscale for one person for a period of time might be downscale for another person. And therefore, don't judge. Let people work out their own problems. And when we get to the body electronics aspect, you'll understand this more fully with a great deal of compassion for the frantic addicts of the people around us.
Everybody has an opinion on what they want to do or what they want to believe, and people can interpret things differently. Well, there's a passage in the Bible where they talk about sexual relationships, and I can't quote it exactly, but it has something to do with the fact that the marriage bed or the wedding bed is inviolate and you can do whatever you want. So, that's not a direct quote, but it's something like that. But no, that's what it is. The marriage bed is inviolate. You can.
Yet, if a man beats a woman into submission in the marriage bed, that is defiled. So you have to understand that there's going to be certain laws there that if you break those laws, you're in trouble. And so I've heard men say that they can do anything they want to their wife. And anything they do is their business because they cannot defile the marriage bed, and they'll quote the Bible on it. Well, that person's going to be damned to hell if there ever was a hell. Do you follow what I'm saying? That's a justification out of the Bible for taking over and exercising usurped authority over the woman. Now, that's a strong concept. But the thing is, every chicken comes home to roost eventually. And everyone's going to get their violation of law. And the laws of karma are exceedingly accurate, and we can't mess around with them. So we can't just use that one phrase and justify that anything goes, because it doesn't. The laws are of such a nature you have to be careful as to how you treat your marriage partner. With love, respect, with dignity, and never go against their wishes of any kind. This is something we have to look at and consider. I know many macho men where they think that they can do anything they want to, and their wife is their meat, and they can take that meat and do anything they want to with it. That's not true, friends. Okay. Pardon me? I've seen henpecked men that are exactly in the same boat, and they're misused by the woman, psychologically distressed by the woman, and that is where the man has to stand up for his rights.
Thank you. Sometimes I'm just in total confusion. I was just thinking about the number of wives my grandfather had, and in fact how many wives my father has at the moment. And I was wondering where John's position is on this. My father has 5 wives. My grandfather more than 10. So where do you stand on that? And
in Sri Lanka, if you go back in the history of Sri Lanka, some of the women had 12 husbands. Now, what are you going to do, gals? Now, in many places on the earth, that a man might have several wives, but he has to treat them all equally. The same thing with the husbands. The husbands have to be treated equally. You have different places in northern India where men have more than one wife. And you have over in the Muslim territories, you have 4 wives or more, sometimes 3, sometimes 2. Now, does the woman choose to live that way? Yes. Should her choice in her mate that she loves, should you deny her that choice? No. Should you deny 12 men all wanting one woman, the same woman? No. I imagine that you're working things out to where you have a certain schedule there is going to be a little difficult. But doggone it, if they want that type of life, let them have it. One of the greatest things that we will have in the future politically, people will have the choice. Does a woman today have the choice of a mate that she wants? Not under enforced monogamy. No, they don't, because they can't have the man they want. And they have to marry another man. Oh boy, that comes in body electronic stuff. But they can't have the man they want because the man they want's been married to somebody else. Now, if you're in Africa, a woman can go to that family and say, hey, look, you're the guy I love. I want you to be the father of my child. Does the woman have a right to choose who she wants to be the sire of her children? You betcha. That's one of the most natural laws in the world. But the laws of man have subverted all these rights of people to where people do not have the free agency of conscience. Now, you might say, oh, that's blasphemy. Blasphemy, blasphemy. Monogamy is the only way to go. And the people who are religious in Christianity, they're talking about that. They're denying then Father Abraham. They're denying Isaac and Jacob and all their very large families. Now you consider that, my friends. Doug, you want to say something, sir? Anita. Does the law make you free? Should it make you free? If the law of God makes you free, as it says in the Scriptures, then the laws of man that are out of harmony with the laws of God are corrupt. And that's where we'll eventually have to say, hey, if you're depriving me of my right of conscience, and I'm not bothering or hurting anybody, and I'm not stepping on somebody else's toes, then the laws are going to have to be changed, my friends. And in the future, they will be changed. So a man with 5 wives or 10 wives or 12 wives will be able to live that way because they want to. And a woman with 10 husbands or 12 husbands or 20 husbands will be able to live that way if they want to, because that's the freedom of the soul. Gloria. Come up here, Ian. These are hypothetical questions, but in this day and age where you have a lot of solo moms, they have it's a very realistic question.
I asked the question if John said women should be free to choose the father of their child. What my question was, if a woman wanted to have 10 children, for instance, could she select 12 different, did I say 10 or 12? 10, well, 10 different men.
Here's where we get into the law of telegeny. Now, we weren't going to discuss that. Now, don't anybody run out on us now. Tom, you come back here. Now, don't anybody run out on us now. This is important stuff. And Doug, you're on. We're going to talk in depth on the law of telegeny that we're saving until body electronics.
Okay, I wanted to just preface this for a moment. If we start to look at some of these situations, hypothetical or otherwise, that we're considering here, like a man having many wives, a woman having many husbands, a woman having children by a number of different men, one of the things to realize here, as John has pointed out earlier, is we all see the world through a glass darkly. We all see the world through our own crystals. We all have our patterns of programming. And if you look back on the level of the constitutional man, which is your genetic structure, we all come from various cultures. And one of the things that's going to get passed down through this genetic lineage will be the cultural belief systems that go back in our ancestry. So the thing to realize is when we start talking about concepts like this, I think it's safe to say that for most of us here that are say, of a Western heritage, it's probably virtually impossible for us to look at these things without having our buttons popped. It's probably virtually impossible for us to consider these things without having all sorts of resistance patterns come up. And I think it's a real stretch and a real challenge for us to really be able to consider whether or not there might be circumstances in which these types of arrangements would be absolutely the most appropriate and godly thing for the people involved to do. Now, Esther and Sama and some of the others here come from a different culture. They come from a different part of the world where, going back in their ancestry, going back in their genetics, these are things that have been practiced for centuries. So I'm sure, because I've talked about this very same subject at seminars with both Esther and Sama, and for them, this is not a problem. It's a problem for them when they're in the Western world. It's a problem for them to integrate these types of concepts into their experience in the Western world. But from a genetic level, they don't have the resistances to these concepts that probably virtually everyone else here has. There's maybe 4 or 5 people here in the room, I would say, that probably come from a genetic lineage where these things have been practiced in recent times. So I want you all just to consider that before you just sort of throw everything out, is recognize that none of us are seeing reality as it is. We're all seeing it through a tremendous amount of genetic filters. Now, which brings me neatly to the subject of telegeny, which is another way we acquire a lot of filters. we have a concept called telegony, which is spelled Telegony. Telegony, telegony. Some will pronounce it telegony, but Telegony. It's a very, very, very simple concept. If you have a female of any species, and she is impregnated by a male of that species, they will then have children, a child or children, that will bear characteristics of both of the parents. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I think we all understand this.
Give an illustration with rabbits.
Okay, this is an easy illustration to consider. If you take a female rabbit that would be, say, a long-haired female rabbit, or if you went back many, many, many generations, she was 100% pure, long-haired female rabbit. If that female rabbit, long-haired female rabbit, is bred with a short-haired male rabbit, then they will have offspring that will display mixed characteristics. Some of the offspring may have long hair, some may have short hair, some may display characteristics of both parents. Okay, that's no news to anybody, I'm sure. Once that has happened, however, you can take that same female rabbit, that same long-haired female rabbit, you can now breed her with a long-haired male rabbit. So you got the long-haired female rabbit that's had a previous generation of offspring with the short-haired male, and you now breed her to a long-haired male. Now, most people would expect that you just get long-haired offspring because you got two long-haired parents. But actually what you will get is you will still get mixed offspring because the female, as a result of the initial conception, has taken on a portion of the genetic structure of her mate. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, she is capable of passing on genetic characteristics of her previous mates, assuming that there has been a conception that takes place. This concept is actually well known, at least among a lot of people that are into, say, like what happens if you have somebody that has a breeds purebred dogs, and they have a female dog, and she kind of manages to get out when she's in heat and gets knocked up by the local mutt. I mean, what's the phrase? She's been ruined. She's been ruined. So obviously the dog owners understand this concept because if genetics work the way most people think, well, then the dog owners would say, well, that litter's not going to work, but the next litter ought to be fine. But that's not how the dog owners react. They understand that that female has been changed permanently as a result of the conception. I want to make one thing very, very clear here. It's not the birth of the child that's important, really, in this instance. It's the conception. So this applies to abortion situations as well. It applies to miscarriage situations as well. Whenever there's been a conception that's occurred, that female has taken on the genetic characteristics of the male. Now, it doesn't go the other way. In other words, the short-haired male rabbit, who's had kids with the long-haired female, he cannot pass on her characteristics to another female. He does not pick up her genetics. So the situation is slightly different for the male and the female, but it's quite equal in this regard. Let's say you've got a man who has had children by 4 or 5 different women in the course of his youth. He is now genetically tied into all of those women because they bear his genes, they bear his DNA. This means that wherever those women are, whether they're halfway around the world, whatever they're going through, emotional ups and downs, healing crises, you name it, it's going to have an impact on him because he's tied in with them. On the other hand, whatever he goes through is going to affect all those women, and whatever any of those women go through, it's going to affect the other ones and their children. So if you start to expand this out a little bit, you take we've told you situations in body. I see half the people turning green here. We've probably told you in seminars about many situations in body electronics where one member of a family does a lot of point holding, and maybe their parents' eyes change color, or their siblings' eyes change color, or their children's eyes change color. Well, guess what? How about their husband's eyes or their wife's eyes? Because if those two people have had children together, or at least conceived together, they're now tied in. And so it's possible that one's going to affect the other. Well, if you can affect your wife or vice versa, what about your in-laws? Or as John would like to say, what about your in-laws and your outlaws? I mean, you're tied into a lot of people. So you're tied into your brother-in-law, and then you're tied into your brother-in-law's sister, and then whatever guy she married, and then their children, and you can start to expand out a ways, and you start to realize after a certain point, who aren't you tied into? Now, the repercussions are a lot more pronounced the closer in you get. But the bottom line here is that when you are out there, shall we say, spreading your seed or receiving seed, you have to understand that when you're conceiving a child, or even when you're just in a situation where the conception is possible, you're potentially establishing a permanent link with that other individual. Now, I'm not making that either a bad thing or a good thing, but just recognize that you are tied in with that other individual pretty much permanently. So you're taking on the energy of that other individual.
If the female rabbit is capable of passing on the gene to children, or to other rabbits, little rabbits of other male rabbits, does that mean that it affects her physically and mentally as well? Will she change characteristics as well?
Absolutely, yes. She becomes a genetic cross. She's taking on the genetic structure of her mates. So if you use the example that you spoke of there, where you had a woman that perhaps had 10 children by 10 different men, she's taken on an awful lot. I mean, for better or for worse, she's taking on a tremendous amount of energy patterns. And after a certain point in time, I think she's not going to really know herself. Well, let's put it this way, she's not going to be herself, at least not what she started off. So you start to look at some of the ramifications of this concept. And again, we're not trying to make anything right or wrong, but let's just consider the consequences of whatever actions we take and recognize what we set in motion for ourselves thereby.
Let's take a merchant marine, and they're going from port to port to port, all right? And they spread their seed viably around, and they got maybe 20 children out there. You talk to the seamen, they know this. They got 20 children out there, but let's just take one of these women with only one child, and the seaman never sees her again. She's a cross between him and her, and no matter how many other children she has from 10 different men, she's still carrying the seed of that first relationship where she has that first child, and the second and the third. Now, all those kids from the 10 different husbands grow up, and wherever they go with all their psychological interchanges, every time they get a burr in their saddle over something, whose hormones are going to be rattling? Eh? The semen. Now, the semen's hormones are going to be rattling if one kid over here gets punched out in a brawl in the local bar. Now, no matter what age they are, all of those children from all of those different women and all of the future children from those women, no matter when they get upset or psychologically upset or whatever happens, they're going to rattle the hormones. When I say rattle the hormones, it's just like they're all on the same frequency. What happens to those kids, the original father will feel every single bit of it, and he doesn't know why he's feeling all these strange dreams at night, and all these get woke up at 3:30 in the morning and one thing or another, and just all this stuff, and they welcome a good night's sleep. Hour notice for the kitchen crew, an hour notice before eating. Ken, where are you? Okay, if the kitchen crew, I hope you caught up on this, because this is good stuff. I want to say one thing more here, Doug. We had one fellow in the back of the room that considered the consequences of his many conquests, and he promptly went outside and vomited for about an hour. It made him terribly sick because of what he had done. Another gentleman who hadn't quite reached the point of, shall we say, physical maturity yet, he came up with a bright idea that because of his superior genes, he had the responsibility of propagating the entire world and then upgrading them with body electronics.
because of this connection that's established, it should be fairly obvious to all of us that we might want to be very, very careful who we would choose to propagate with. John has made a statement here earlier that the woman in particular has a, shall we say, a right as well as a responsibility to choose her mate. Because consider here in this situation, both the man and the woman are affected, yet the effect is not equivalent. The woman is actually taking on the energy pattern of the man. And this means for any woman who is considering having a child, she needs to be very, very certain that that's a man whose energy pattern she would care to carry around for eternity, or at least for the rest of this lifetime, because that is indeed what she's going to be doing here.
I was under the understanding that anyone you had ever had sex with, you were connected to. Am I wrong?
You can be emotionally tied into them. Okay, on one hand. Now that's the least that'll happen. But when you have a conception take place, now if you have an abortion, it doesn't make any difference. Once you have that conception take place, you have what they call protomorphisms, which go out throughout the body, creating a cross between that male and that female. From that time on, you are no longer yourself. You are a cross between yourself and that first mating. Now, if that first mating was a indiscretion at the age of 14 and you had an abortion, that doesn't make a bit of a difference, because you are still a cross between that first mating, between that individual and yourself, and all of your children will carry that man's genes from that time on.
Tarek, you had some information on, wasn't that you about Okay, was it a year? Okay, Tarek shared with me in Pennsylvania that he came across some information that was in the blood, correct? I believe for approximately 5 years, you would still be, like going back 5 years, if you were able to analyze the blood of an individual, you would be able to detect all the people that they had had intercourse with or exchange of body fluids over about a 5-year period. So there is still an effect, even without any conception occurring, that's actually measurable physically, let alone whatever other effects there would be on other levels.
If there has not been conception?
That's my understanding. Is that correct, Tarek? With or without, wasn't it any intercourse or any exchange of fluids?
Without conception, you're saying. I find that difficult. I'll have to see that, because the thing is, I find that difficult to believe, because what I have found through my studies is that if the protomorphisms are there due to conception, then you do have that cross, no question. But you're saying in the blood you can trace the energy patterns of a mate, of just a mate with no conception. That's heavy-duty stuff. I haven't heard that. That's really interesting. Tariq, if you can find that, I'd be grateful, because I'd like to really intellectually challenge that. My mind is open to some degree. Okay, I'd like to see that.
The other question was back when we were talking about in the future, people being able to choose their own mate, and you'd have these tremendous families. That by then, I'm hoping that the entire social structure would have changed and people would willingly be responsible for their children financially.
Well, that last question more or less cuts a little bit into what I was going to say. A young lady once told me in the course of conversation amongst the whole group, sorry, how's that, better? No? There? Where? There. Oh, right. Right. Got it. In the course of a conversation amongst quite a crowd of us, there was a young lady came forth with a statement. I don't have to have a husband to have a child. Now, to my generation, and there's quite a few of us here that are of my generation, that is, that's just a no-no. Another thing coming up. A lady once, when I used to drive buses and I was sitting at a terminus waiting for time to take off, and one of my regular customers was in there, and she was looking a bit off colour, so I said, "Yeah, what's the matter, lass?" "Oh," she says, "you know that young lass that I've got adopted?" I said, "Yeah." "She's just informed me that if I don't let her do what I tell her, if I don't let her do what she wants to do instead of what I tell her to do, she's going to go off and get herself pregnant, and the state's going to keep her." Now, what's your comments on that? Should the states be keeping all children, or should more responsibility be put on the people who are procreating these children?
I'm trying to remember if it's the 4th chapter of Isaiah or not. Is it the 4th chapter? Yeah. In the 4th chapter of Isaiah, we try to study our scriptures so that we become conversant with every scripture from every religion, okay? But I think in the 4th chapter of Isaiah, it says very clearly, in prophecies for future times other than now, that the time will come when 7 women will take hold of one man, and they won't want the responsibility of economic support, but they would take care of their own economic support during that time, from my understanding of that particular scripture. But the thing is they want to have a child, and they want to have a child by a particular man that they are, shall we say, emotionally or otherwise connected to. Do they have that right and privilege? Let's please consider that. But I think that that'll probably be at a time when there won't be any government to support them on the dole.
The young man that said that about, can you hear me? About propagating and I think maybe the young man who had the idea, John was talking about having children and then using the body electronics. No, I've done my share already. But I think that, who can say it's a bad idea? If anyone has read Earth or Bringers of the Dawn, written by Barbara Marciniak, there is something in there which is supposed to be channeled from the Pleiadians that does actually connect with what Tarek is supposed to have found. And it says in there that if a woman shares her menstrual blood with a man, or a man actually deposits his seminal fluid inside her, then they are sharing their ancestors and their DNA right back.
Do you know this lady? Have you studied her prophecies very carefully and her information very carefully? Anita and I have had the pleasure of taking care of a number of people that have been connected with the Pleiadians, where they have followed to the letter what they have been told to do. I have never met any sicker people in my life. And from my checking with these people and treating these people for months at a time, okay, I have found that their information is way, way off base. And I'm going to say that to the material here on the tape. I have found that information is way off base, and you had better be very, very careful as what you believe about this Barbara Marciniak, because her stuff is just, you measure it with everything else which is held sacred and pure by every religion on the face of the earth, and she's way off base on everything she teaches.
I didn't say I believed it, John. I just said I read it.
That's very, very good. Now, all of the people we have met are worshiping people that they don't know, that they haven't shaken hands with, that they have no knowledge of, but that comes through channeling. And this is where you have to be very careful of any channeling that you hear about. And this one type of channeling is just way off base that this gal's putting forth. And I wonder, my golly, how can people believe that rot? Please understand my point of view on that. I've read her material, and I just say, this is way off, and all I can do is warn you against that, because if you're instructors in body electronics and you're taken in by what this Barbara Masiniak says, you're off the deep end. Pardon me, but you are. And this is something that you'd better stay wide away from and start checking your information and comparing it with other things. But I know a whole lot of people who are into the health field, and they've been taken in by this Pleiadian philosophies and their teachings and whatnot, and not one of those people have ever met any of these people that they claim to be having channels coming down through. Okay, I'm sorry to get a little bit strong on that, but I've seen so many sick people from that area. Okay, sir.
To answer the first question was asked here, I met, I don't remember where I was flying, but I met in business class this man who was doing genetic tests, whatever. He used to work with the police or something, and that's the one who told me that once somebody had a sexual intercourse where the sperm enters the vagina and stays for a certain amount of time in the vagina, it goes into the blood, and it would be for a period of 5 years. That's what he told me. And I don't know anything about that field, so I just assumed and listened, put it on the shelf, as you all say. And he said that you could trace for around 5 years if a certain person had slept with another person. That's one. I have no idea. He was doing stuff with the police. Basically, he was in were murder cases and everything. That's what he was doing, basically. And then the other thing is, I've lived 2 years in West Africa, and when I went there for the first time, I was amazed that when a cousin of mine came down, they thought he was my brother, and people would ask us immediately, same mother and father, and we'd go, whoa, what is happening here? We just didn't understand that. And just everybody would ask us, same mother and father, same mother and father. I mean, we were cousins, okay, they couldn't see the difference, but the issue what I'm trying to get at is that it's so normal there for, as you're saying, well, we're going to have a child with this person, we just do it, that it's so normal when somebody introduces themselves, they say, this is my brother, but we have a different father. It's a very normal thing.
John, I was wondering if, just to get back to a man having many wives in the scriptural sense, if you go back, I was wondering if you could comment on the teachings of Joseph Smith and the true means and understanding of polygamy.
If you go very carefully into the teachings of Joseph Smith taught, bottom line, in his teachings, that the woman had the right to choose her husband, okay? And that it was very lawful before God for a man to have more than one wife, comparable to what has happened in Africa, comparable to what has happened among the Arab people and so on, where a good half of the earth, frankly, about 100% of the people, if you take a look at it, about 50% of the earth is polygamous. If you want to take a good close look at it. Now, you have, in India, you have polygamists there. And it's a situation that's interesting. Now, the thing is the woman who is married to the man has to first of all give her consent for taking on a second family. And then those two families, to start with, have to be treated equally and fair. Now, this question came to my mind because my father, who lived up in northern Idaho, and he had moved from Wyoming, where he was a cowboy, and he moved into to work as a clerk in his store. His first clerk was this old bearded man that came in and said, I want one of these and one of these and one of these and one of these, and he went around. And then after it's all over and done, he says, now you double that order. And the old manager from the store looked at my father, where this was his first client. He says, now son, you had better make sure that that man has two identical of those things, because he lives up in the hill with two wives, and he takes care of each of them equally on a temporal basis. Now that's something I want you to consider, that the wives are all treated equally from a temporal point of view, and then of course you're going to have to work out the individual differences and the individual desires of that. Now that was taught, and Joseph Smith was against the law of monogamy completely. And it wasn't until Abraham Lincoln came along where there were two barbaric issues from the position of Abraham Lincoln. One was the slave issue. But with the slave issue, he put polygamy on the same docket, where the second barbarism that had to be done away with was polygamy, and that instituted the law of monogamy, making it a law against that sort of thing, where today, if you go into the Rocky Mountains, about 1/10 of the people are descended from polygamists in the Rocky Mountains in the United States today. And probably, there's probably living today, about 10% are polygamists. That's in that, all the range from one end of the Rocky Mountains to the other, all the way from Canada, clear up to Cardston, all the way down into Mexico. Now this is something of kind of an interesting thing, because in this situation here, Joseph Smith said there are two crowning principles that must be lived. One of them is the freedom of religion, so to speak, regarding marriage, where polygamy was permitted. And the other was where people must learn to live collectively in what the Mormons called the United Order, and that's learning how to get along together by the unanimous consent of everybody involved. Now, these laws are no longer taught by the Mormon Church today. In fact, if you even talk about them or promote the idea of these things, you're excommunicated. And that's like every other religion. You have a man with a great vision, and I might add that Joseph Smith is one of the few men in America that I know of that made his resurrection and ascension. Because in 1986, and I know all the families involved, I know all the people involved, I've made it a point to meet him. Joseph Smith came to a meeting in 1986, and he was killed in 1844 at that time. And so he came back and he met all of his old buddies again, who were old men at the time, and met with a lot of younger men and shook hands with them, and then gave an 8-hour meeting where he prophesied what would take place in the future to the U.S. government, all of which is coming true. All the prophecies have come true. But there was 13 men there, and they took that out and kept it fairly well secret among all of their families. I've met a number of their families, a number of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they all have the same stories. Now, here's Joseph, who was a resurrected being at that time, and I stuck my nose into this pretty carefully to find out who's resurrected around here and who isn't. And I had a chance to talk to the man whose father was responsible to take the outer rosewood casket of Joseph Smith under a cabin all the way from Illinois all the way over to Utah. And the body of Joseph Smith was not there when they got to Utah, and it didn't drop out of there. And the thing is after that, different people had met with Joseph Smith personally, and here's a man that taught love, he taught community, he taught unity, he taught the freedom of the human soul, he was a strong supporter of women's rights, all these things that later has become a reality. This man died at a very early age.
If I could say just a couple of things here. If you look at this concept of monogamy, just consider a couple very, very simple fundamental facts here. There are always, among humans, more females than males born. Okay, if you look at it statistically, it's never 50-50. There's always slightly more women than men. In the first 20 years of life, males will always have a greater mortality than women. That's even without warfare and other things. So bottom line, by the time you get into the marriage years, you're never going to have equal numbers of the genders. And so you're always going to have, if you have an enforced social system that only allows monogamy, or that's all that's really permitted, one of the inevitable consequences of this, which you'll see in all your monogamous societies, is prostitution. And if you think that's a harsh statement, just consider this. Back in the time of Brigham Young, who was kind of the next in line after Joseph Smith was murdered, they had the Mormons basically went out and populated what's now the state of Utah. And at the time that in Brigham Young's day in Utah, where Salt Lake City was a very, very large city, and if you know anything about the history of the American West, it was a pretty wild time back then, and prostitution and brothels were found in every little town all over the West. Salt Lake City was probably the only city in the entire United States where there was no prostitution. So you start to look at some of the consequences on a social level of an enforced policy of monogamy. And this I'm sure this pops a lot of buttons, and I kind of mean it to. I'd like to recommend a book. You may have very great difficulty finding this book, but it's a book I would recommend very, very strongly if anybody wants to learn a little bit about the history of Joseph Smith. The title of the book is The Fate of the Persecutors of the Prophet Joseph Smith. The Fate of the Persecutors of the Prophet Joseph Smith. Lundwall. Yeah, N.B. Lundwall, which is Lundwall. So it's a fairly difficult book to get. I did manage to get a used copy a few years back, but it's a very interesting book. One of the things that you have in there, The Fate of the Persecutors of the Prophet Joseph Smith, by N.B. Lundwall, Lundwall. It's one of the most moving books I've ever read. It has a tremendous amount of first-person accounts from the early days of the Mormons, in Joseph Smith's lifetime, as well as later on. And one of the things that's very interesting is when Joseph Smith was killed, he was being held in a jail in the state of Illinois, and he and his brother Hiram were both killed, and another man, John Taylor, who was with him, was injured very badly, basically by a mob that came in and stormed the jailhouse. Joseph Smith jumped out the window. They were in a room on the second story, and while he was still alive, and he was shot a couple times and fell to the ground there. There was a man in the crowd there that had sworn that he was going to cut Joseph Smith's head off. He approached Joseph Smith's body, where Joseph Smith's body was sitting up, kind of sitting upright against a wall, which is basically the position he'd fallen into and died. And this was reported by numerous witnesses, because there were hundreds of people present at the time. The man went over there fully intending to cut Joseph Smith's head off, and he pulled out a big knife, and as he got it close to the body there was a tremendous burst of bright light, and the man fell to the ground, totally incapable of moving or speaking for quite some time after that. There were numerous people who took part in the murder of Joseph Smith. Now, perhaps only one or two of them actually fired the bullets that got him, but there were a great number of people that were present in this mob that killed him. And the Mormons, as most of you know, even way back then, liked to go around and knock on doors and whatnot. And for the next 30 to 40 years in the U.S., it's very, very common for Mormon missionaries to be out and about in different parts of the country, and from time to time they would run into people who had taken part in that murder. And the people would come up to them just begging for forgiveness and saying that basically they had never known a moment's peace the rest of their life since then. Because basically from what they'd seen there, especially that burst of light there, they had been totally convinced about the godliness of this man. And there's all sorts of other stories in there. There were a number of people that participated in the killing who themselves basically ended up suffering these really bizarre deaths. There were a number of people that experienced basically their entire body rotting, but they wouldn't die. They would just kind of go through years and years of their body just sort of rotting and just tremendous amounts of pain before they would eventually die. The book's full of first-person accounts like that. I'd recommend it very highly if you can get a copy. Sam Weller's the place to get it. I have the address if anybody wants that. The place that I got a copy of this book, it's a place in the States that you can write to. It's called Sam Weller's, Weller. I'll write it up on the board.
while he is doing this, I suggest getting the first edition, because the further editions were changed and a lot of very, very interesting material was left out. Get the first edition of that particular book. I know N.B. Lundwall personally. I've been in his home many times, and during his last days of his life, I was there with him. And this man is one of the greatest men I know. And I wish to point out one thing. I hope you're ready for this. All of the books of the early Mormon teachings in the year 1922 were called together up and down through the Rocky Mountain area, and they were all burned at huge book burnings, with book burnings as high as houses, because they wanted to do away with the original teachings of Joseph Smith, do away with them absolutely entirely, because it was contrary to everything that the people 100 years later wanted nothing to do with. Now, this is how a religion changes in a very short time. And so the Mormon Church today is just a bare shadow of what it really was back 100 years ago. They don't teach the same thing. In fact, where you had to join the church, you had to believe certain things 100 years ago. Today, if you believe those very same things, they cut you off from the church. And this is something I want to point out to you, that every single church within 100 years or so is never the same as what it was originally brought out. Now, I'm not pushing Mormonism, but I want you to know that Joseph Smith is a resurrected being, and that I've checked into thoroughly from a number of different... yes, I don't want to bring that out because that's just too much. But Joseph Smith is a resurrected being.
Thank you, John. I was wondering if you could talk about how within the polygamous system that Joseph Smith was living, I believe he had quite a few wives. That's right, yeah. And I think Brigham Young had something like 50, was it, or 70 or 72 or something. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how when a very advanced soul comes into the physical world, that they look for a specifically advanced, parents, if you like, and baby to come into the world, and how that fits in with the polygamous theory, and how the wife was, or how the baby was. You know exactly what I want to say.
Very simply, the advanced souls come into those families where the child is conceived in nothing but love. Okay, that's number one. They also come into those families where the women are prepared by a purification technique of only having intercourse for the purpose of having children. Okay? And so many of the advanced souls would come into that type of family situation. And I think the same thing will hold true if you look at the history of polygamy. It's not for lust. It is for having children. If it is used for lust, then that type of polygamy situation will fall apart and completely, because the women will not have it so. Yes. Pardon me?
I think that system is lost now. I'm just wondering if there's any of this original practice of bringing these advanced souls in through the original methods and teachings of polygamy. I mean, nowadays polygamy is just like, it's a lot to do with lust, isn't it?
You take a look at some of these Muslim families, okay? You have so much respect there between the wives and the husband, and so on. They're wonderful to their wives and to their children, and the love there, when it's lived properly, is absolutely beautiful. If it's not lived properly, it's chaos. Esther.
Brooke, I come from a polygamous family, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. If you really see what goes on, there is no lust in it. It's hardly even thought about. Now, Anita is having a lot of problems not being able to do a lot of what she would want to do. If there was a polygamy here, then she would be able to go around with John with no problem whatsoever. And then the wife that she would have chosen to be her helpmate would have been doing the rest of the household work, and they would have been assigned. But with the present day's economy and the way the African governments have all twisted things, and now free market or whatever thing it is, things have changed. But formerly it was a necessity, I mean, because there was loads and loads of entertainment and bits and pieces of household things, and the older woman in the family would assign a lot of things, and the children that were born were not raised necessarily by the mothers who delivered them, but by the elderly woman in the family and that kind of stuff. There was a lot of, and they were working together. I mean, there was nothing like my own thing and your own thing. Okay, there were bits and pieces of jealousies, but lust was not a part of it. I think so. Yeah, so.
Got to have the voices of experience here.
Yeah, it's strange because I was actually brought up by my stepmother. My stepmother's house and my mother's house. But I grew up in my stepmother's house. And I never saw any difference between them. I only knew the grains that were going to my mother's house when they were harvested. Not during farming. I wouldn't be able to go to the farm and say, this is my mother's plot or that's my stepmother's plot. And they were all going to the farm together, to cook together. If one woman cooks the food, or if all of them cook the food, they all go to the same house. The boys are eating with their father, the females are eating with their mother. And so to me, I have never ever had problems with polygamy, although things are changing now because of economic reasons and maybe greed. So I'm a typical example. Thank you.
In Hawaii, among the Polynesians, the Hawaiian people, my kahuna teacher told me that in their village where he was raised on the big island of Hawaii, he says he was several years old before he realized that he didn't have about 5 or 6 mothers. And when he was a little kid, you know, and he was nursing, he would nurse this mother here, and over here he'd nurse this mother, and he'd nurse this mother, and nurse this mother, and it wasn't that there was my child and your child. This is our family, and all of the children were all of their children. And this is how all of the mothers would, in this extended family, would handle it. And they all lived collectively, and they all shared. And there was no concept of that is yours and that is mine. If you follow me, they shared everything that they had. And if somebody brought in a big load of fish, they all shared equally in the fish. Now, this is something I want you to consider, folks. This concept of unity in diversity, mind you, when looked at properly, extends far beyond the wildest dreams, the wildest considerations of the restricted concepts of the Western civilization.
I'll try to speak on something I know about, so I won't talk about a lot of wives or anything. I'll jump back to what you were talking about, like Bringers of the Dawn and the Pleiadians, and then you got the Abraham tapes, and you have all these other books that are being written, and you wonder why people read those. Well, I've got a lot of friend girls, rather than just girlfriends, and to try to understand a girl better, if you're going to try and do anything at all, you try to read what they read and listen to them talk. So I've read an awful lot of those books. I've read Bringers of the Dawn. I've read the Celestine prophecies and stuff like that. You have to realize they read those because it gives them a way out. Virtually everything, it seems like, comes out has been male-dominated for a long time, which I always liked reading the stuff. But it's like, well, you know, men, when you talk about sex, they think sex. A woman hears love, and it's a big difference. So if you want to find out about it, you better start reading what the girls read and in that type of language and everything. Those books, the Abraham tapes, everything else, it always comes out with a real happy ending. It comes out with everybody's peace, love, and good vibes, and it comes out from more of a matriarchal situation than patriarchal. And I think that's why they like them, because they're saying that the men can't do this, but if it's a woman-dominated society or something, we'll make everything really good and peachy. And look at it, it says so in these books. And there are people who take those books literally as fact. I mean, the Celestine prophecy, I don't know if you guys have read it down here or something, but they just, yeah, but it's fiction. I mean, that's all the